The fog hung thick and heavy over Eldamore as Detective Inspector Elara Voss's car wound its way down the narrow, twisting lane that led into the village. The world beyond the windshield was a blur of muted shapes and greys. The landscape swallowed by the mist, as if the village itself had been swallowed whole by an unseen hand. Elara's fingers tightened on the steering wheel, a faint chill crawling down her spine, not from the cold, but from the sense that something was profoundly off about this place. Eldamore was not marked on many maps, a forgotten pocket of England tucked away behind ancient hills and dense woods. But the recent discovery in the home of Evelyn Harper, a widow who had died quietly in her sleep, had drawn Elara here. The ledger found among Evelyn's possessions was unlike any she had seen, a cryptic, leather-bound book filled with entries of inheritances and strange, coded annotations that suggested more than mere financial records. It was whispered among the locals that the ledger held the key to a mystery spanning centuries, but no one had dared to uncover the truth until now. Pulling into the village square, Elara's eyes darted across the scene. The cottages, weathered and moss-covered, clustered tightly together beneath the heavy boughs of towering oaks. Not a soul was in sight. The village unusually silent except for the muffled drip of condensation from eaves and the distant echo of a church bell tolling somewhere beyond the fog. She stepped out of the car, the damp air clinging to her coat as she pulled the collar up against the chill. Her first destination was Evelyn Harper's cottage, a modest stone structure at the edge of the village. The door creaked open under Elara's hand, revealing a dim interior filled with the scent of old wood and fading memories. Sunlight filtered weakly through curtained windows, casting soft patterns on the dust-covered floorboards. On a small table near the hearth lay the widow's ledger, its leather cover cracked and worn, the gold embossing faded but still legible. Elara's gaze lingered on the book, her fingers itching to open it, but she resisted. First, she needed to understand the people who called Eldamore home. Stepping back outside, she began to make her way through the village, her sharp eyes taking note of every detail. It was then she noticed something peculiar. No one she passed appeared older than 40. Children played, yes, but the adults, from shopkeepers to farmers, all carried the same ageless quality. Faces were smooth, eyes bright, bodies unmarked by time's usual wear. She approached the blacksmith's forge, where the clang of hammer on anvil echoed through the mist. James Marlowe, a burly man with soot-streaked skin and calloused hands, looked up as she drew near. His eyes, however, held a wariness that made Elara's skin prickle. "You're the inspector, aren't you?" he asked, voice gruff but controlled. Elara nodded, offering a professional smile. "Detective Inspector Elara Voss. I'm here about the ledger and Evelyn Harper's passing." James wiped sweat from his brow, studying her with an intensity that suggested suspicion. Evelyn was part of Eldamore's history, same as the rest of us. Not sure outsiders understand the way things work here. "That's why I'm here," Elara replied steadily. "To understand." Their brief exchange was interrupted by the sudden appearance of a group of villagers emerging from the mist, their movements almost too smooth, their expressions carefully measured. Elara observed them closely, noting the sameness in their appearances and the guarded smiles that never quite reached their eyes. As the day wore on, Elara conducted interviews with several residents, each offering fragments of the village's past, though inconsistencies soon emerged. Stories shifted depending on who she spoke with, timelines blurred, and the ledger remained an enigma. The villagers spoke of a peaceful community, yet Elara sensed a fragile tension beneath the surface, an unspoken pact of silence. Back in her temporary lodgings, Alara sat at a small desk. The ledger finally opened before her. The cursive entries danced in the flickering candlelight, hinting at inheritances awarded, debts settled, and names crossed out like forgotten sins. But the deeper she looked, the more the ledger seemed to pulse with secrets, its pages whispering of something darker than mere wills and estates. Her thoughts drifted to the villagers she had met, their ageless faces, the subtle glances exchanged when she asked too many questions, the way the fog seemed to cling to the village like a shroud. What had kept Eldamore suspended in time, and what price had been paid to preserve this eerie peace? A sudden knock at the door startled her from her reverie. Opening it, she found no one there, only a folded note on the doorstep. Unfolding it, she read a chilling message scrawled in elegant handwriting. "Some stones are best left unturned." Inspector Ilaros' heart quickened. The investigation had begun, and already she was entangled in a web of silence and secrets that threatened to engulf her. As the fog thickened outside, swallowing the village whole once more, Alara knew one thing for certain. Eldamore was not just a place where time stood still, it was a place where the past refused to die, and she was about to uncover why. Detective Inspector Alara Voss sat in the dimly lit cottage of the recently deceased Evelyn Harper, the weight of the ledger before her as heavy as the fog pressing against the window. The air was thick with the scent of aged paper and dust, the kind that seemed to hold centuries of secrets. Her fingers hesitated over the fragile pages, the cryptic entries looping in elegant yet faded script. Names, dates, and cryptic notations intertwined in a pattern that whispered of inheritances, but also of disappearances that had long slipped from living memory. Illyra's eyes narrowed as she traced a particular entry, a transfer of property that coincided suspiciously with the absence of a villager who was never spoken of openly. The ledger was more than a mere record. It was a map of Eldamore's hidden past, a ledger of lives both preserved and lost. Despite her training, the detective felt a chill settle in her bones, a reminder that the village was not simply quaint or stagnant, but alive with unspoken tensions. Her investigation led her next to the village library, a cramped, cluttered room smelling of musty books and wood polish. Here she met Thomas Graves, Eldamore's historian and guardian of oral traditions. Thomas was a wiry man in his late 30s, his round spectacles perched precariously on a sharp nose. He wore tweed jackets that seemed as old as the village itself, and his cautious demeanor betrayed the weight of his knowledge. As they sat across from each other at a scarred oak table, Thomas's voice was low and deliberate. Detective Eldamore's history is not written in stone, but whispered in shadows. The ledger you hold is a dangerous thing. It ties this village to secrets that have kept us bound for generations. I urge you, be careful where you dig. Some truths are better left buried. Ilara met his gaze steadily. I understand the risks, Mr. Graves, but I came here to uncover the truth. If the ledger holds the key, then I must follow it wherever it leads. Thomas nodded slowly, a flicker of respect in his eyes. Very well, but know that the village protects its own. Not all will welcome your inquiries. The historian's warning echoed in her mind as she left the library, the steady patter of rain soft against the cobblestones. At the Silver Harp Inn, a place warm with the glow of candlelight and the murmur of subdued conversation, Alara sought another contact, Sophie Whitlock, the innkeeper's daughter. Sophie was a woman in her early 30s with curly auburn hair that framed a face marked by both charm and caution. Leaning against the polished bar, Sophie's bright eyes flickered with nervous energy. I don't know why you're digging into these old stories, she said quietly, but I've heard things, whispers, that the ledger isn't just about who inherits what. There are disappearances, strange happenings tied to certain families. It's not spoken of openly, but it's there. Alara leaned in. "Why do you help me?" Sophie hesitated, then shrugged. "Maybe I want to believe there's a way out of this place. Eldamore feels like a trap sometimes, like it's stuck in time. Maybe the truth can set us free, or maybe it'll just make things worse." Their conversation was interrupted by the low murmur of other patrons and the clinking of glasses, reminders of the village's outward calm. Yet beneath the surface, Alara sensed a current of fear and hope intertwined. Later, as twilight deepened and the fog thickened, Alara wandered the slick cobblestone streets. Gas lamps cast muted pools of light, their glow swallowed gradually by the encroaching mist. Every shadow seemed alive, every distant footstep a whisper of secrets kept too long. The village itself was a living puzzle, each building, each face a piece she needed to fit together. The ledger's entries haunted her thoughts. Who had disappeared? Why? And how were these disappearances linked to the inheritances meticulously recorded? Eldamore's serene facade was cracking, revealing a labyrinth of hidden truths. Elaros' resolve hardened. She would follow the ledger's clues, no matter where they led. But as the fog curled around the village like a shroud, she couldn't shake the feeling that the deeper she delved, the more she risked not only uncovering the past, but disturbing a fragile piece that had kept this timeless place intact for centuries. And somewhere in the shadows, she was sure someone was watching her every move, waiting to see how far she would go. The ledger's secrets were beginning to stir. The fog hung so thick over Eldamore that when Detective Inspector Alara Voss stepped onto the cobbled streets, she felt as if the very air conspired to swallow her whole. The village, with its quaint stone cottages and narrow alleyways, seemed suspended in time. What struck her most was not the ancient architecture, but the faces she passed each one, seemingly untouched by the decades that must have passed. Not a wrinkle disturbed their smooth skin, nor a strand of grey marred their dark hair. It was an unsettling sight, one she couldn't shake as she began her inquiries. Her first interviews were with villagers who greeted her with polite smiles that didn't quite reach their eyes. There was a practiced civility here, as if every word was carefully measured, every glance calculated. Alara noted it, all the slight hesitation before answering, the subtle shifts in posture when she pressed too hard. A pattern was emerging, one of guardedness and a shared secret. Thomas Graves, the village historian, was her next visit. His studies smelled of old paper and wood smoke, a comforting aroma, but one that belied the tension in the room. He greeted her with a reserved nod, his round spectacles catching the firelight as he gestured toward the ledger she carried. "The ledger," he said softly, "is more than a record of inheritances. It's a tapestry of our village's history, woven with threads of loyalty and betrayal." Alara listened intently as Thomas recounted whispered stories passed down through generations, tales of a murder long buried, a crime never fully solved. His voice faltered when he spoke of the families involved, hinting at names that still held sway in Eldamore's delicate hierarchy. "But some things are better left in the shadows," he warned, eyes darting to the window where the fog pressed against the glass like a living thing. Later, at the village inn, Sophie Whitlock served Alara tea with trembling hands. The warmth of the cup was a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in Alara's gut. Sophie's bright eyes flickered between curiosity and fear. "There are stories," she whispered, "things no outsider should hear." Despite her reluctance, Sophie shared snippets of gossip, half-remembered conversations, strange disappearances, the eerie permanence of youth. Ilara pieced together fragments that painted a picture far more complex than a simple murder mystery. Her encounter with James Marlowe, the blacksmith, was markedly different. His broad frame and soot-streaked face were the embodiment of the village's stubbornness. When Ilara pressed him about the ledger and the village's secrets, his response was a curt refusal, his hammer striking the anvil with force that echoed his defiance. "Best you mind your own business, Inspector," he growled. "Eldamore's seen enough trouble without outsiders stirring the pot." The villagers' resistance only deepened Ilara's resolve. She knew the ledger was the key, but its cryptic entries required patience and courage to unravel. As she walked back through the fog-shrouded streets, the whispers of the past seemed to swirl around her, beckoning and warning in equal measure. In the dim light of her room at the inn, Ilara spread the ledger's pages before her. The names, dates, and notes danced in the flickering candlelight. Each entry hinted at secrets long buried beneath the village's serene surface. She traced a finger over a passage that mentioned a sudden disappearance, coinciding with a disputed inheritance, an event that felt less like history and more like a warning. Her thoughts were interrupted by a tap at the door. It was Sophie, her expression taut but resolute. "I want to help," she said quietly. "There are things you need to know, things I can show you, but you have to be careful." Ilara nodded, the weight of the village pressing down on her shoulders. The ledger was not just a book. It was a map to a truth that some would kill to protect. And in Eldamore, where no one aged past 40, the past was never truly past. Detective Inspector Ilara Voss sat alone at the small wooden table in the dimly lit corner of the village library. The brittle pages of the widow's ledger spread before her like a map of secrets. The faint flickering light of an oil lamp cast shadows that danced across the room's ancient oak shelves, their spines whispering tales of Eldamore's long-forgotten past. As she leaned closer, the faint scent of aged parchment and dust mingled with the damp chill that seeped through the stone walls. Her eyes narrowed on a particular entry, its ink faded but still legible, a date from over a century ago, alongside the names of two prominent village families. The entry was strangely sparse compared to others. There was an abrupt break in the ledger's usual meticulous detail, as if someone had deliberately erased or omitted significant information. Ilara's pulse quickened. This was no mere record of inheritance. It was a carefully crafted silence, a void meant to conceal. The ledger's cryptic nature gnawed at her, urging her to seek answers beyond the written word. She knew she needed help understanding the village's tangled history, so she turned to the one person who might know its every nuance: Thomas Graves, the village historian. Thomas's study was a small sanctuary cluttered with books, maps, and faded photographs. The scent of old paper was stronger here, mixing with the faint aroma of pipe tobacco. Thomas himself sat behind his desk, adjusting his round spectacles as Ilara entered. His wiry frame seemed smaller in the dim room, shadows emphasizing the furrow in his brow. "Detective," he greeted her with a wary nod. "I assume you want to talk about the ledger again." Ilara didn't waste time. "There's an entry here that doesn't add up. It suggests a cover-up, something was deliberately left out." Thomas sighed deeply, rubbing his hands together in nervous agitation. "You're not the first to notice. But Eldamore's history is layered with secrets. Some truths, I fear, are better left buried." "Better left buried?" Ilara's voice was steady but edged with disbelief. "How can justice be served if we ignore the past?" He looked away, his eyes distant. "I was raised to protect this village, to keep its legacy intact. But the ledger, it's a burden. I wrestle with whether revealing the truth would save us or destroy us." Their conversation hung heavy in the air, a fragile bridge between duty and conscience. Later that evening, Elara found herself at the village inn, a warm glow spilling from its windows into the fog. Inside, the hearth crackled, casting dancing flames that flickered over the faces of a few locals. Sophie Whitlock sat nearby, her auburn curls catching the firelight, eyes bright yet shadowed with unspoken fears. Sophie's voice was low as she leaned closer. "Elara, I've lived here all my life. I've heard the whispers about the ledger, the pact, the things we're all supposed to forget. But I can't stay. This village, it's suffocating. There's no future here, only the same faces, the same stories, over and over." Elara nodded, understanding the weight of Sophie's words. "What would you do if you were free of it all?" "Leave," Sophie said simply, her voice barely above a whisper. "Find a place where time moves forward, not stands still." The conversation deepened Elara's resolve, but also stirred a quiet sorrow. How many lives had been quietly imprisoned by Eldamore's secrets? That night, as the wind howled outside, rattling the window panes of her temporary lodgings, Elara sat by the window, the ledger open on her lap. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the village in a ghostly embrace. Shadows loomed larger, and the weight of the uncovered secrets pressed down on her chest. The cover-up hinted in the ledger was not just a matter of record, it was a fracture in the village's foundation, a wound that threatened to bleed truth into the shadows. Elara knew the path ahead would be perilous, with allies uncertain and enemies hidden in plain sight. Yet, the truth called to her with an irresistible insistence, pulling her deeper into Eldamore's dark heart. As the candle flickered and the mist pressed against the window, Elara whispered to herself, "No secret stays buried forever." And with that, the night closed in, thick with promise and peril, as the village's past began to unravel beneath the weight of its own silence. The morning air hung thick with fog as Detective Inspector Elara Voss made her way toward the quaint cottage at the edge of Eldamore. The village was wrapped in its usual shroud of mist, the familiar dampness seeping into her bones despite the brisk autumn chill. A heavy silence blanketed the streets, broken only by the occasional drip of moisture from the eaves overhead. Elara's boots crunched softly against the scattered leaves, littering the narrow path, each step echoing her growing sense of unease. Her destination was the home of George Mallory, a man well regarded in the village and one she had come to consider a reliable source in her early inquiries. Yet today, the cottage stood deserted, windows dark, door locked tight, and no sign of life. George had vanished without a trace. Elara crouched beside the garden gate, noting the undisturbed earth and the absence of footprints other than her own. The door showed no sign of forced entry, and yet the stillness inside was unsettling. Had George fled, or had something more sinister taken him away? The ledger's cryptic entries and the villagers' guarded responses now seemed to deepen into a tangible threat. Back in the village hall, Elara found herself amid a gathering of Eldamore's residents, their faces pale and eyes flickering with suspicion and fear. The air was thick with whispered conjecture and hurried glances. Thomas Graves, the village historian, stood quietly near the back, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his spectacles. His usual reserve gave way to a rare display of anxiety, a flicker of worry crossing his lined face. "Elara," Thomas murmured when she approached. George was one of the last who dared to ask questions. His disappearance, it's no coincidence. Sophie Whitlock, the innkeeper's daughter, hovered nearby, her bright eyes shadowed by worry. "People are scared," she said softly. "They're afraid what you might uncover. It's not just about George, there's something buried here, something they want to keep hidden. Before Elara could respond, a hush fell over the room as a striking figure entered. Margaret Langley moved with a grace that seemed almost otherworldly, her pale skin and silver-streaked hair catching the faint light. Dressed in vintage black, she exuded a serene but commanding presence that stilled the room. Elara Voss. Margaret's voice was calm, yet laced with unmistakable authority. You tread on dangerous ground. Eldermore's peace depends on its secrets remaining buried. Elara met Margaret's gaze without flinching. The truth must come to light, no matter the cost. Margaret's eyes darkened for a fleeting moment, then softened with a hint of sorrow. Beware, detective. Some truths demand a price too high to pay. The warning hung in the air as Margaret turned and glided out, leaving a ripple of unease in her wake. That evening, Elara met Sophie in the quiet confines of the inn's back room. The fire crackled softly, casting flickering shadows against the worn wooden walls. Sophie's voice was barely above a whisper. I want to help you, Elara. But the village, it's not just a place. It's a pact, a burden we all carry. George's disappearance, it's a message, a warning to stop digging. Elara's jaw tightened. I can't turn away now, Sophie. Not when so much depends on uncovering the truth. Outside, the fog thickened, swallowing the village in a cold embrace. The line between ally and adversary blurred as fear and loyalty wove an intricate web around Eldermore. Elara's investigation had crossed a threshold, and the shadows of the past were beginning to stir with restless intent. As the night deepened, so did the mystery, and Elara knew that the vanishing of George Mallory was only the beginning. Somewhere beyond the mist, the village's darkest secrets waited to be revealed, but at what cost? The silence of Eldermore was no longer peaceful. It was a warning, and Elara was listening.